Hello and welcome to today's tutorial. My name is Joseph. I hope everyone's doing well today. So, in today's video, I'll be covering a simple mobile navigation system. This is to do with when you're in room, navigating around the room, different ways you can do it. So, today we'll be covering some physics, fun and games. I'll explain to you guys, it's not hard, but it's useful stuff to know. Again, I just want to say a big thank you to the channel. You guys are all amazing. Let's get into it. So, in this video, I'll be covering movement systems. Now, you'd be asking, what do I mean? So, when you're in game like this, for example, and you can see my lovely house there, very professionally drawn, normally you'd use your cursor, but on mobile, you can't quite do that. So what we do is, you can see I've got this white dot as a representation. If I click and hold, you see it attaches to my mouse, and if I navigate around, you can see it moves, right? But what if I want to move without needing to go to the edge using my finger, which can be quite cumbersome? So, for example, we can do stuff like this and build a navigation system where we can click and flick around the screen, like so. Now, you guys are going to imagine this is massively complicated to do. It's not as hard as you think it is. First thing I had to do was, under the room settings, and I'm still getting my head around this, is go into here, and I needed to set up and enable my camera. I need to enable my view. I then had to set my object, which is this object here, as the primary follow object. So, I'm hoping you guys all know how to set up views. If you don't, send a message and I'll do a video explaining it. It's pretty much the same as Gamemaker 1 though, except it's in a different spot. So what did I have to do to make this work? So under the objects here, and I'll run you guys through the code. I've made it nice and big for you this time. So I've got a few different values here. So I've got a starting X, starting Y, both set to -1s. Ending Y, ending X, ending Y, both set as -1. This amazingly named value of var time of x1, y1 versus x2, y2, 0, and then a friction array. And this will make sense in the next step because I just set different friction ratios instead of just one flat friction, which then gives you a different linearity to when you're flicking around, which means you can add more of these or less of these, and you can do pretty much anything you want. So under the step event here, this is where it gets a bit more complicated, but not too hard. Although I wish Gamemaker would literally give me, don't do that, more space to do this, because their screen feels somehow smaller than when I last used it. Let me just expand that. So here, what I do is, the first step is I just set up the time system. And if you guys looked at my if statement tutorial just explaining some basics, you'll see I'm actually using a lot of the stuff I talked about because it's very useful. And the way I've configured this is I'm looking at my starting X and my starting Y, and if they are not equal to -1, as you can see I was very specific in setting that value, if they're not equal to that, so if they're not equal to that, it will engage the next step. So it will check this out, say, yes, I'm good to go. And then it's going to verse my X and Y ending values, the same principle, but this time I'm saying I want them to be equal to 1. So, -1, which means if they are still engaged, as in you haven't released, because you'll see further down I've got a release function, it will start doing a count up of time. And because I know Gamemaker calculates in steps, I just add 1 to that. You can change this and you can modify it to whatever you need. The next aspect to this is my click starting point. So this is my first step. So you can see I've done this for mobile. As you guys can see, I've got the check mobile button and left click instead of the mouse keys. Now, I should state this will work just fine on computer as well if you're trying to do it on that. So the click starting point looks at when I press the key, and it just sets the X and Y of my object to my mouse, which gives me my normal movement and functionality. The next step is it checks to make sure my X and Y starting points are both -1 before starting the next step. because I need to make sure always to reset values. So I've var starting X and var starting Y. They just save the value once, and that's it. They're locked in. The next step here, so that's our click function. Our next step here is using the release function. So when I release the key, release my mouse click, for example, or release the screen if you're on mobile, you'll see here I've got my two var ending X and Y, which then refer back here, which now tips this to being false, which stops the timer. So here, I stop the timer, and then I do a few calculations. So my first step is I grab my direction, or calculate my direction. And this can be done because I've stored both my starting point of direction, or my starting X and my starting Y, and my ending X and ending Y. And this is important because then I can kind of tell it which direction I want it to go in. My next step is calculating speed. Now, anyone here that remembers their physics class, speed should be calculated off of distance divided by time. So here I can run a calculation called point distance, which gives me the distance in pixels, which is just using the same values as the above. And then I can divide it by my step value here, or my timing value that I created. Again, here that disengages when I release the second value. The next part to this whole equation is I run 3 gradiating speeds. So I look at my friction array. So you can see here my friction array, and that's just my selector, so that just tells the array which one to select. My friction array will look at if you're between a speed of 0 and 25, set yourself to 0, 25 and 50, set yourself to 1, 50 and greater, set yourself to 2. The last steps here in this release function is I simply reset my values and return them all back to 0 to reset the system again to run again. The last part is the speed array. So, or not speed array, the friction array. So in here, I basically go, speed is not equal to 0, set friction to this value. And in a way, for example, some bad programming on my behalf, I should then go, else friction array should most likely be equal to 0. So it resets, and friction itself should also be equal to 0, like so, just to reset all values. So that's the code. The only thing in the draw function here is just me grabbing the friction array selector so I know which one it's selecting and drawing an indication. So normally when you would be running this program, you wouldn't have those engaged. When we run the program, like so, like magic, we can move around the screen. Nothing overly fancy. So you can see it's pretty simple, pretty easy. So I'm hoping that helped you guys out. I'm going to put this up on the source code in the Google Drive so you guys can access. And I'll put some better comments through. Have a great day. You guys are all awesome. The usual stuff. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.